Today on the Locked On Hornets podcast, it's a Monday solo sholo, and I'm going to be talking about some positives that we can finally take away from the preseason after a rematch with the Boston Celtics. Plus, I spied a few things that happened in Greensboro. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. And we've got another preseason game coming up tonight against the Wizards. That's all today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
And just like that, it's the Locked On Hornets podcast. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every day. We are free and daily wherever you get podcasts, including on YouTube. I'm Doug Branson. You can catch more of my work on my substack, Every Hornets Boxscore, at everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm doing game notes there. We've got a podcast going on there looking back at historical box scores from Charlotte Hornets history, and I'll soon have some stuff up on YouTube. You can check that out now. Go to YouTube, search Every Hornets Box Score. Today on the show, we've got a recap of this past preseason game number 3 against the Boston Celtics. We're also going to previewing the preseason game number 4 against the Washington Wizards. So we've got a lot to get to in this show. Want to get right to it. The big story in another loss, it was a third consecutive loss in the preseason, but I think the big story from this game is, number one, it wasn't a double-digit loss. It nearly was, but the final score was 112-103, so right at the BetOnline line of 9 for the Hornets, the deficit. But it was a second-half loss. The Hornets had control of this game in the first half, and I thought generally in this game, the Hornets played with much more purpose and organization on offense and effort on defense, especially in transition. If you remember in that second preseason game, they were getting beat in transition on dead ball possessions, on offensive foul dead ball possessions. I don't even know how that's possible, but they were managing it against Indiana, and the score showed it. But against Boston, they were able to clean up a lot of that, despite a third consecutive game without Gordon Hayward and Cody Martin, and a second consecutive game without a backup point guard option, really a legitimate backup point guard option. Dennis Smith Jr., a second consecutive game out for personal reasons. Now, I should add a little context to this one. The Boston Celtics decided to rest most of their starters except for Jaylen Brown. So you can't read a ton into any of the quarter results or the final itself as it relates to kind of how you think they will play in the regular season. And I think it's always dubious to really look too deeply into the results and the final numbers on these preseason games. At least that's how I feel. I'm mainly looking for how do they play? What's their attitude? What's their effort? What's their organization? What kind of offense are they running? What kind of defense, what kind of effort on defense are they? And are they really, the most important thing I think for any team in the preseason, are you starting to, especially with a team with a new coach, are you starting to establish a team identity? Are you doing the things that you say you want to do in media day, in these training camp availabilities? It's one thing to say them. It's another thing entirely to actually do them. And I thought in this Boston game, they began to do some of those things. And I thought LaMelo Ball also began to start to dominate in a way that he's probably going to have to if Miles Bridges is no longer part of this team. LaMelo, not only for his own individual stats and individual accomplishments, if he wants to take his game from all-star to all-NBA, he's going to have to dominate offensively. But for the team goals, I think part of his evolution and the team's evolution is going to be him taking more of a primary role, especially in scoring. And we started to see him do that in the first quarter, and that brings me to my numbers to know. Here are LaMelo's first quarter stats: 15 points on 6 of 12 shooting, plus 3 assists in that first quarter. He was absolutely excellent using the dribble, using penetration. Pull-up jumper was finally locked in. He was locked in a way in this game that he hasn't been so far in the preseason. Now, there were some second-half struggles for LaMelo. I'll talk about that in the second segment. It's one of the things that I spied. I'll get to that in a moment. And some things that he's probably going to have to look at and the team's going to have to look at as they move forward. But the first quarter really showed you, oh, yeah, that's the LaMelo Ball. That might be the next evolution of LaMelo Ball offensively. I think we saw that in the first quarter. Also, numbers to know, assists. Ball movement has not been very good for the Charlotte Hornets through the first 2 preseason games. And in fact, in that game 1 against Boston, they were beat in the assist column 41-13. And so much of that was happening because Boston was moving it in transition and the Hornets were not. And when they got into the half court, the ball wasn't moving either. So you weren't moving it in transition. You weren't moving it in the half court. And that's how you accumulate 13 assists for a game and how you give up 41 assists. But in game 2 versus Boston, they significantly reduced that margin, 27-23 in favor of Boston. So no, they didn't win it, but they reduced that margin and added 10 more assists. So again, this game was not about, we've seen the final form of the Charlotte Hornets and we can feel more confident about their ability to overperform in the regular season. No, that is not my takeaway from this game. My takeaway is that the Charlotte Hornets finally made progress, and progress has been slow. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you've got a new coach, that you've got a team trying to mesh with those ideas that maybe they haven't been held as accountable to over the past couple of seasons. I'm sure Miles Bridges' absence has something to do with that. I'm sure the absence of Gordon, Hayward, and Cody Martin has something to do with that. There's a lot of figuring out happening right now, and this team's not very deep, and they're having to rely on some players that played a lot of time in Greensboro last season and are sort of showing it. I mean, they're showing their inexperience with the NBA game. And so that's been difficult for this team overall. But the takeaway from this game, the Charlotte Hornets finally made progress on displaying the principles they've been talking about since Media Day. Okay, coming up, I put my detective hat. I don't know what you call a detective hat. Is it just a detective hat? Maybe it has a name, the hat that Sherlock Holmes wears, or you're just sort of standard detective hat. I don't really know if that has a particular name, but I put on my detective hat, I got my spyglass out, and I spied a few things that were happening in that game in Greensboro against the Boston Celtics. I'll talk about that coming up in just a moment. But first, I got to tell you about our friends at LinkedIn, a relatively new sponsor for us, and they've been great so far. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and I can tell you that from personal experience because this podcast and some things that I do in video production and podcast production, I own my own production company, and hiring is difficult. Hiring freelancers or hiring full-timers, it's a haul sometimes, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster, and this is the best part, especially if you're a small business owner, for free. Add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, and you can spread the word that you're hiring. They've got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And look, that's how you get ahead in small business. That's how you beat the competitors, is by having better people. Your people are your best weapon in the ability to get more sales. So check it out. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on Locked On Hornets, thank you so much for making us your first listen, whether it's in the car or on the treadmill or maybe at work. We really appreciate you prioritizing the information here that we're delivering on Locked On Hornets. I don't know if I said this in the intro, but we always have first-time listeners to the show, and especially in preseason, a lot of people gearing up for the season, checking in with the show because we're Locked On Hornets. We're every day. I feel like we're the #1 podcast on the Charlotte Hornets. I don't know if that's factually accurate, but I'm going to say it is. But if you're checking in with the show on the first time, I'm usually joined by my co-host, Walker Mail. I'm usually the sort of reactionary part of this podcast, and Walker Mail, who's on WFNZ all week, giving you you both Panthers talk and Charlotte FC talk and Hornets talk there. He's usually the voice of reason. He is the radio professional, but he couldn't make this show today. He'll be back the rest of the week, but just wanted to mention that in case you're a first-time listener. It's not just me, solo dolo, on the mic. Okay, let's get to some news, and then I want to do this I Spy segment. Just a little bit of news on the Miles Bridges front. Of course, he's facing multiple felony domestic violence charges in California right now. The preliminary hearing for those charges has been continued for a fifth time to Wednesday, October 12th. I believe that court date was on Friday, so the fifth continuation. We don't really have any other news, and until we do, I don't know that there's any reason to continue to talk about it, so I'm just going to leave that over there. Wednesday, October 12th, should have some kind of further update. Okay. I spied a couple of things in Greensboro. I'm going to start with LaMelo Ball because that's where we were in the first segment. Thought he played exceptional in the first half, especially that first quarter. He was lighting it on fire. We saw dominant LaMelo Ball on offense. But then I thought in the second half, he started to force things a little bit, and we saw more of the LaMelo Ball that we saw in the first two preseason games, forcing the action, making some ill-advised passes, and forcing it, especially, I thought, offensively, his own offense, taking some questionable shots. And I think this might happen more this season as he's asked to do more. You know, I think there's a big question as to, like, as his role grows in the offense, because I don't even think last season you could confidently say he was the absolute unquestionable number one option on offense, because you did have the ascension of Miles Bridges to the team. And so he wasn't the leading scorer of the team. It was very close, but there was a three-headed monster in Terry Rozier, Miles Bridges, and LaMelo Ball. And so, you know, we haven't seen him be in that number one role. And I think when he's been placed with some of these bench units that have been full of guys like Book Knight and Thor and others that haven't gotten a lot of time in the NBA, you've seen him force the action a little bit. And I think that's going to be a point of growth for him this season is how to manage the game, especially when you're being asked to do a lot more. Can you be efficient? Both guards in this past game, by the way, played better. But again, this whole game was about making progress and not seeing the final form. But the guard play so far in the preseason has been a disaster. Both LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier not shooting the basketball well. And this one, it got a little bit better. Then again, the second half, though, for LaMelo Ball brought his efficiency down. He finished the game 8 of 22 after, again, that first quarter of going 6 of 12. And then Terry Rozier finishing the game 5 of 11, but doesn't hit either of his three-point attempts. He finishes the game with 14 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block. LaMelo was 23 points, 9 assists, almost had a double-double, 4 rebounds, 3 steals. Had 4 turnovers and 6 personal fouls. He actually fouled out late in this game. Again, it's all preseason. There's a lot of figuring things out happening, but I think it's something to watch as LaMelo Ball is asked to do more. Can he maintain efficiency on offense? Can he keep the turnovers down? Can he manage games? All right, so the second thing I spied was Steve Clifford, new head coach, and he's got some things to figure out in terms of his lineups, in terms of his playing groups, and I thought he started to do that by reworking the lineup breaks and adding multiple starters in with some of these players, these units that were full of players that didn't have a lot of NBA experience. I think it was a smart move. It was something I was calling for after the first preseason game against Boston, when you saw extended minutes for these lineups that had Rozier or LaMelo Ball paired with Nick Richards, Thor, Book Knight, and Jalen McDaniels. Those lineups were getting absolutely eviscerated, and I didn't think, sticking with those lineups through essentially the first half or the second half of the first quarter and the first half of the second quarter, that was really benefiting the Charlotte Hornets. And again, it's not about winning preseason games or even winning quarters. It's really just about playing well and that allowing your team to play more confidently. And I thought they were playing so disastrously that it was actually leaking into the confidence of the team. team. So I'm glad that Steve Clifford started to rework that. You saw LaMelo and PJ together with some of the bench units. You saw Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball playing the 2 starting guards with the bench unit. And I thought those instances started to work well. And in fact, the game I thought got away from the Hornets towards the end when they did go back to those units, which is fine. Like you don't need to, play regular season rotations in the preseason. It's fine to go back to that. But that's, I think it does show though that, and I'm going to repeat this because we've got first time listeners and I think it bears repeating, that this is a team that really certainly can't have 2, but I think there's even a question if you have 1 major rotation piece like a Gordon Hayward or a Cody Martin. Obviously, if LaMelo is out for extended time, it's season over. It's Wembanyama tanking time. But even if you have a Gordon Hayward or Cody Martin out for significant amounts of time, the fact is the draft picks that they've made over the past couple of seasons are not ready for serious NBA rotation minutes. You could give them those minutes and they could improve on those minutes, but your team's success is not going to be there. So that's just the facts. And I think this preseason, I think even somebody who was extremely optimistic about a James Bouknight or a JT Thor, like I was extremely optimistic about JT Thor. I haven't been that impressed with what I've seen from him so far, even though he did have a Thor's hammer dunk in that last preseason game. But I haven't seen enough exciting things for him to be like, oh yeah, he's like definitely legit rotation piece. You can play him night in and night out, and he's going to help your team win. I'm not there yet. I'm certainly not there with James Bouknight, who was 0 for 8 in this past game. But I did see small improvements. That's another thing that I spied. I spied small improvements for James Bouknight and Mark Williams. I thought both played better defensively. Like I saw some actually great defensive possessions from James Bouknight, something that I've struggled to really see his entire NBA career, albeit a short career so far. I just haven't seen it, but I saw a great defensive effort from James Bouknight. I think Clifford is going to have a big influence on his ability on that end of the floor, but still offensively struggling. Is still going one-on-one, head down towards the basket, getting stripped. Had a bad turnover trying to leak it out, push it ahead, threw it right to Boston. So there were some issues there offensively for James Bouknight. The coaching staff is still high on him. Look, Clifford was really high on Dwayne Bacon. So, I mean, he would praise Dwayne Bacon and say, look, Dwayne Bacon's a starter in this league. Dwayne Bacon didn't end up being a starter in this league. Like, coaches can see things in players and can try to motivate players by publicly acknowledging those great things, but it doesn't guarantee that player is actually going to go out there and execute. It's all up to the player. It doesn't matter how much Steve Clifford says, I believe in James Bouknight. If James Bouknight doesn't go out and perform for you eventually as a coach, you have to say, look, I mean, opportunity given. I don't think we're there yet at all with James Bouknight. There's a lot of story left to write on this guy, and I hope for the team's sake that he figures it out, because look, they're going to need a ton of guard play because they don't have serious offensive threats down low. So you have to have excellent guard play to win. If you're this team, you have to run, which is something James Bouknight can do. He can push it in transition. So, I hope that James Bouknight figures it out either this preseason or at some point for the team's success. Mark Williams, again, more evidence from him that I don't think he's ready to be a major rotation contributor right now. I thought he was going to be, but it doesn't look like that. Again, he had a few good defensive plays, but offensively, obviously the big highlight play that a lot of people saw was Mark Williams getting rejected on an easy transition play by Justin Jackson. Justin Jackson, I don't know, not somebody that I feel like is sort of a block machine. Is I don't rate Justin Jackson as somebody that's like extremely athletic, but Mark Williams is slow to get up. And then I thought, and Clifford kind of mentioned this, but like pick and roll defense is something that Mark Williams has to figure out. And there were a couple of plays in this one where his feet got caught up and he wasn't ready to defend a sort of a standard NBA pick and roll. And that's something he's definitely going to have to figure out, because look, he's not switchable up top. And that was the big thing. Like, you're not going to be able to switch Mark Williams up top. So he's got to be able to figure out, those drop coverages that Steve Clifford made Al Jefferson into a serviceable, be careful here, not say that he was like a good defensive center, but he was a serviceable defensive option down low at the power forward position or at the center position, because he was able to sort of understand these drop coverages and execute on them to limit what teams did at the rim. And so that's where Mark Williams ultimately has to get to. Final thing that I spied in Greensboro, I spied an old face, an old friend. That's Kemba Walker. He was sitting courtside with Hornets executives on either side of him in Greensboro, the crowd giving him a nice shout out. I love the whole idea of doing the Greensboro game, by the way. You've extended, I think they extended the lease or the agreement to play in Greensboro for the Swarm. They don't play in the Greensboro Coliseum, despite the court being decorated, the Greensboro Coliseum court being decorated with the Greensboro Swarm. They actually play in sort of a field house that's on the complex. But it was nice to see them give the shout out to the Swarm, and nice to see Greensboro giving a shout out to Kemba Walker. Now, some updates on Kemba Walker's situation. It appears from everything that I read that the Detroit Pistons, who currently have Kemba Walker under contract via trade, that they are going to buy him out. I don't know what the whole, I don't know, but I think it's easy to figure out what the holdup is. Kemba Walker would like to be paid a majority of his contract, and the Detroit Pistons are saying, look, if we're going to buy you out, you need to cut us a deal, cut us some slack here on your deal. And so that's obviously what's holding it up. But Kemba Walker wants to play. He's not going to play in Detroit, it looks like. And so if he wants to play, ultimately Kemba Walker and his team have to get together and figure out, all right, what are we willing to give up here so that I have the opportunity to play? If he is bought out, and also Kemba Walker and his team have to figure out, okay, if I'm bought out, do I even have an opportunity to play? Is Charlotte going to extend me an offer? Because if I'm not going to play this season, then I do need to try to get as much of my deal as possible, obviously. I don't know, and even though he was flanked by Hornets executives, I don't think we should take that to mean that Kemba Walker is absolutely going to get offered a deal by Charlotte if he is bought out. The team is going to, I think, more intimately know what Kemba Walker has left in the tank than anyone else. And, you have to be careful there that you don't let sentiment leak into the logical choice. You do have Dennis Smith Jr., who has missed the past 2 games for personal reasons, but it looked like he was back at practice, so they may get a look at him for the preseason. But I think you just have to be really careful here that Kemba Walker actually can come on and contribute, because I don't want the Charlotte Hornets to sign Kemba Walker as a sort of mascot. I just don't think that would help the team. They need players that can actually contribute on the floor. So we'll keep an eye on that. All right, coming up on the show, I'm going to preview this preseason game that's coming up tonight. Hornets playing the Wizards. It is televised, 7 o'clock p.m. on Bally Sports Southeast and on the radio WFNZ. So we're going to talk about an important preseason game, number 4. But first, I want to tell you about our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline, they are our source for preseason betting for sure. We've been using them to figure out these lines, so we figure out whether to take the bet or not. But BetOnline.net is also your number 1 source for football betting info this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events. I'm talking MLB. Hopefully the Braves can figure this thing out. They've got the Phillies coming up. I'm really hoping. I got to see their World Series last season with my newborn daughter. That newborn daughter is now 1 year old. And I hope that she gets to see another Braves championship. Anyway, MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, head to betonline.net. Use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Much more ahead on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Stick around. Final segment of the Locked On Hornets podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Hornets at Wizards, 7 o'clock p.m., Valley Sports Southeast on the radio, WFNZ. Here's what you need to know. Bradley Beal, the star guard for the Washington Wizards, went into the health and safety protocols. So the Hornets have one less Washington Wizard weapon to have to worry about to game plan against. That would be positive, I guess, if it's in the regular season, but I think in the preseason, you'd actually rather a team come at you at full strength to really give you an idea of what, to gauge your team a little bit better, what your team can do. The Wizards have gone 0-2 in 2 preseason games, but they were in Japan, so they were part of the international NBA effort. But they've had a week since to kind of figure things out. So they've kind of had the early preseason games and then late camp. They've also got some new faces joining Bradley Beal, Monte Morris, Kristaps Porzingis, Will Barton, so a couple of Nuggets coming over to join the Wizards. Now, I was looking this up because I'm just curious how Kristaps Porzingis has played against the Charlotte franchise, Charlotte Hornets specifically. KP hasn't been an extremely tough cover for the Hornets over the years. It's not like he's dropping 40 on them consistently. But limiting his shooting has been a challenge. There haven't been many games where Kristaps hasn't shot 40% from 3. And I don't expect that to change much this game. I think you're going to see plenty of KP threes go down because you don't have a lot of options at center that can really hang with them unless they try to work out some PJ. But again, that's the thing about KP is that even if you put PJ, who can stay with you on the 3-point line, can recover back to you. KP, he's tall. That's why he's a unicorn. He can shoot over the top, especially over PJ, who he's going to have several inches on. So KP going to be a problem. They've got to figure that out, but they don't have to deal with Bradley Beal. Oh, that rhymed. One thing I'm watching in this game for the Charlotte Hornets, do they finally let Gordon Hayward and Cody Martin play, and how does that ripple through the lineups? The lineup breaks that we talked a lot about in that second segment. How do they change when you let Gordon Hayward and Cody Martin finally play? They got to get these guys in, first of all, for their personal just sort of in-season or regular season prep, but also just to see what you have for the team. And so Gordon Hayward's been out because he knocked knees in practice, and the knee was feeling a little funny, and they wanted to be precautionary. He probably could have, if it had been a regular season game, could have gone in that first preseason game. But they just wanted to be precautionary. And then Cody Martin, left knee tendinopathy, so just left knee soreness from gearing back up for the regular season. Do they, again, get both these guys in? Does DSJ, probably no on DSJ. I would assume because he's been out for personal reasons, they're going to let him, get a few days of practice in before he gets back in, but unsure about that. We'll see closer to game time. But the other question I have, though, if you do get Gordon Hayward and Cody Martin back in, do you use this game as an opportunity to see what you have at full strength, or do you wait until the next preseason game to do that? And in this game, do you give opportunities for some of the players that have been playing a lot, especially your starters, to maybe get some rest? I'm looking at a guy like Terry Rozier, who's played 30 minutes a couple of times this preseason already. A veteran. He's been around for a while, has some years on his knees. Maybe you give him an opportunity to rest, but maybe he doesn't take that opportunity. Maybe he's a Jaylen Brown type of cat and says, no, if we're hooping, I'm hooping. So we'll see. And finally, am I taking the bet? Well, you know my answer on that if you've listened to this show a lot. I don't bet on the Charlotte Hornets in the preseason. It's just not happening. But I will give you the line courtesy of our friends at BetOnline. Look at that. The Hornets -4. Believe it's the first time this preseason that they've been favorites in a game, and they're getting 4 points. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the news on Beal's absence. Over and under set at 217, so a decently high, actually the lowest scoring game of the night. And that makes a lot of sense if you follow the Charlotte Hornets this preseason. Their offense has not been good. So we'll see if that improves. We really haven't seen like a legitimately great offensive game from the Charlotte Hornets yet. So maybe, again, do they get back to full strength? Do they get back to playing some of that offensive basketball that we've been accustomed to seeing in Charlotte for the past couple of seasons? Big questions. We will be doing a postcast tonight after the game, so maybe look in your feeds after the game tonight to see if we've dropped a late night episode. Walker will be rejoining me to discuss everything that's happening in this Washington Wizards game. Until then, make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA. It's your daily NBA update in under 30 minutes. For Walker Mail, I'm Doug Branson saying, go Hornets, go America, let's swarm Charlotte.